Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Conservation Conversations. Thank you all for joining us for the last conservation conversation of 2020. My name is Ed Pritchard. I work for Miami Eco Adventures. We are a unit within Miami-Dade County Parks. This webinar is a joint series between UF IFAS Extension, Florida Sea Grant, and Miami Eco Adventures. We will be offering this webinar series every month, starting again in the spring on the second Wednesday at noon. Although we can't see you in person right now, we are excited to offer this webinar series in this virtual format and reach even more people than we normally do. Everyone in this webinar is currently muted, so I ask that you remain so and type any questions that you might have during the presentation in the chat box, which you can find at the bottom of your screen on the toolbar. Myself and Anna and Heather Tedlow will be moderating this chat. We'll have the Q&A with our presenter today at the end of the presentation. Again, this presentation will also be followed by a trivia, our end of year trivia that covers all of the conservation conversations that we've had this year. So please stick around for that. Again, this webinar is being recorded, and a link to this recording will be sent out in the next few days, so that way you can share this amazing presentation with your friends. Please do follow us on social media. We'll be putting our social media information at the end of the presentation, so you can follow and keep up to date on our upcoming topics for our upcoming webinars. If you want to get on a mailing list to receive an email with these topics as well as other information on this series, we will provide an email for Anna Zangronis, who will be able to moderate that and add you to our list. All right, now without further ado, I'd like to introduce today's guest presenter, Mr. Gary Bremen of Biscayne National Park, who will be giving today's presentation titled Girls Gone Wild, Women Protecting South Florida's National Parks. Take it away, Gary.
All right, thanks so much, Ed and Anna, for having me here today. One of the things that the pandemic has done has given me an opportunity to do some research into the non-dominant stories, non-dominant narratives of South Florida, and this one is very appropriate to this year, which we'll get to in a little bit. But one of the things that I learned, why is my slide not advancing? So am I doing something wrong on my end, Ed?
Gary, if you go down to the bottom left, if you hover, there should be an arrow that pops up. You'll probably have to advance the slides that way. Does that show up for you? It's
not working for me there, no.
Right, hold on one second. And then
Gary, this is Anna. Are you having trouble advancing your slides?
Yes, I'm
Click on your landing slide once, and then that should activate the PowerPoint.
Okay, there you go. You're so smart.
That's why.
All right. So I was asked to tell a little bit about myself. I have been a ranger at Biscayne National Park, going on, or a national park ranger going on 35 years, most of that time at Biscayne National Park, which is an extraordinary area just to the south of where Ed and Anna are on Key Biscayne and Virginia Key. So everything from the tip of Key Biscayne south is that area, gorgeous area of blue water and blue skies and amazing wildlife. And it's the place I love more than any other on this planet. So this presentation, as I said, kind of came from doing some research into the non-dominant narratives that we've got here in South Florida. And one of the things that I learned is that in a lot of ways, men are real jerks. And this became apparent in so many of the stories that I read. And so basically, as a representative of half the people on the planet, I just wanted to say to the other half of the planet, sorry. It's appropriate that we do this presentation this year because, as many of you know, This is the year that we celebrate the centennial of some women getting the right to vote in the US. That did not include Black women. It did not include Native women or Asian women or lots of other people for various reasons, but it was still worth celebrating. And on August 26th, national parks across the country celebrated by lighting their buildings and places in the colors of the women's suffrage movement, which are gold and purple. And that's Biscayne National Park there in the center. We were happy to be part of that. But a lot of people looking at this slide, when I say that these are national parks, say, well, that's not a national park, that's a building. And people have different ideas of what national parks are. And one of my favorite things to share with people is what a national park really is. And so let's take a look at that as a start. So here's a map of the US. National parks, as we use it in the National Park Service, we speak of national parks, but also national monuments, national memorials, national historic sites, national battlefields. All of those sites are generically referred to as national parks. They include places that are natural and historical and recreational resource types. Germane to this particular conversation today, there are a few places that are involved women's rights. So if you go to upstate New York, Women's Rights National Historical Park is where the first Women's Rights Convention happened back in 1848, I believe it was. And that's where Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and all kinds of folks were, and Frederick Douglass, there were guys there too, who started that effort that often left out people of color, by the way. That was a white women's suffrage event. So that is a national park in upstate New York. In Washington, D.C., Belmont Paul Women's Equality National Monument is the site that was the home for the National Women's Party, the folks who were really striving and pushing and working to get women the right to vote. That happened in ultimately in 1920. It's also the site of some really horrific stories about women who were arrested as being insane and put in jail and force-fed and really horrifying things. And that is why one of the symbols of the women's suffrage movement became a jailhouse door. And you'll see I'm wearing it on my uniform today. When we get to that at the end, is a pin of a jailhouse door. That was the pin that was given to the women who were jailed in their fight for equality. All told, the National Park Service protects now 422 areas, with 3 of those being added in the last month, 6 weeks, I think, maybe 2 months. So 422 areas, but we're going to be focusing today on just a few. Here in Florida, we have 11 national parks and 4 in South Florida, and I'm going to narrow it down even further to look at the 2 most well-known. So of course, that biggest one is going to be Everglades National Park. It is the largest subtropical wilderness in the United States. And at 1.2 million acres is actually also, I believe, the 3rd largest in the lower 48 states. So it's a big chunk out there. It is not a swamp, as a lot of people like to call it. It is a river. And a river actually has flow to it. This river just happens to be about 50 miles wide and mere inches deep. So it flows very, very slowly, largely because of that sawgrass out there. There is considerable ecosystem diversity out there, but in the early 1900s, that ecosystem diversity was shrinking at a pretty alarming rate for a variety of reasons. There was the harvesting of orchids by the cartload, as you see here. There was the taking of tree snails. If you were a tree snail collector, you would go, if you were an unscrupulous tree snail collector, you would go in and find as many tree snails as you could. And because they were all in an isolated island in the Everglades, a hammock, they all tended to look alike. And you would collect every one that you could find. And then to make sure that you had the only ones of that type, you would set that hammock on fire, killing all the remainder, and you had unique snail types. So that was a threat to the area's diversity as well. And perhaps the best known is the fact that birds were being depleted, and that was largely for the millinery industry. Feathers for hats, that became very, very fashionable to have dead birds on your head. And so these women are showing some of that. And fashion is weird. These are the same people that gave us Crocs and capri pants and other travesties too. So it's not unusual that that you would find this kind of stuff, but it was a worldwide fashion trend, and South Florida was at the heart of the collection of those feathers. So into that comes a woman named Mayman Jennings. And Mayman Jennings was born in 1872 in New Jersey. At a fairly young age, she was exposed to politics because her father was a state senator. And still at a fairly young age, less than 20, she met the man that would become her husband, William Jennings. And they moved to Florida. And William Jennings ultimately became the governor of Florida in 1900. Now, when you're married to a politician, you become the first gentleman or the first lady or whatever it is. Of course, she was the first lady of Florida, and that gave her a lot of influence and power. And she put that influence out there through the Florida Federation of Women's Clubs. She did a lot of work on a variety of topics, including parks. And particularly in South Florida, her efforts kind of centered on having an area near Homestead become the first state park. It was called Royal Palm. And if you are familiar with Everglades National Park, there is the Royal Palm area. That is the site of the first state park in Florida. And she encouraged people to protect that. She encouraged the women's clubs to work towards that protection. And this might surprise you, but a lot of guys are jerks. And so their husbands would kind of blow them off. And they were very serious about this and did not want to be blown off in their things. So Mayman Jennings had an interesting way of encouraging these women to get their way. And it was the no park, no pie. She said, if your husbands refuse to do what you want in terms of helping you get these areas protected by using their influence or their money or whatever it was, then simply deny them their pie for 2 years. Now, some of you probably have figured out that pie was a euphemism for something, and it was a very, very effective way for women to get what they wanted from men. And in 1916, Royal Palm State Park was established. Royal Palm State Park no longer exists because it was subsumed as the center of Everglades, or the core piece of Everglades National Park. I would be remiss if I didn't point out that despite the fact that she fought for this place and the birds that live there and the animals that live there, you notice what's on her head in this portrait. It was fashionable, especially for wealthy women, to have dead birds on their head. So perhaps nobody is more closely associated with ecosystem preservation in South Florida's national parks than Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. And she's not a native South Floridian. A lot of people think she is for some reason, but she was born in Minnesota in 1890. She had a very brief marriage to a guy named Kenneth Douglas. And Kenneth Douglas was kind of a drunk and a liar and a cheat. Basically, Kenneth Douglas was a jerk, and she got rid of him pretty early on. For whatever reason, I don't understand. She didn't get rid of his last name, so she became Marjorie Stoneman Douglas for her entire life. She was quite a writer, and her father was an editor at the Miami Herald, so she was able to work as a society columnist, and that kind of bored her. She wasn't real interested in that kind of stuff. She wanted to do other things. So she was involved in the women's suffrage movement, fighting for that in the very early part of the century, going to Tallahassee to argue the case where she felt she was completely ignored by the men there. She joined the Navy. She was a yeoman, which is basically a really fancy secretary. She did not like the Navy at all. She abhorred getting up early, and her officers did not like that she was constantly correcting their grammar and usage either. So it was a mutually beneficial departing of ways. So she goes back to the Herald and starts writing there and writing about all kinds of things. She wrote a lot about poor people, particularly in Coconut Grove area where she lives. She worked hard to get people there, mothers who had babies, get them milk. She worked hard on indoor plumbing problems with a lot of the poorer people not having indoor plumbing, getting them the funding to do it so they could repay it. It wasn't a gift. So she worked hard to elevate people, which was something that she doesn't get a whole lot of credit for. Her writing got noticed, and the editors of a book series called Rivers of America approached her about writing a book about the Miami River. And in typical Marjorie style, where she said pretty much anything she wanted to anybody, she said, why would I want to write about the Miami River? What is it, like an inch long? And so she instead proposed that she write about the Everglades, which she understood to be a broad, very shallow, slow-moving river. And she is the person that ultimately coined the term Everglades as a river of grass. And she published a book by that title that is her seminal work. That said, Marjorie herself wasn't really big on going to the Everglades. And she said, it is too buggy, too wet, and too generally inhospitable for anyone to go there. So she didn't go herself, but she was really important in protecting the area through her writings. She had an absolute bulldog tenacity. You would not want to cross her in any way, because she would dress you down in words. And it didn't matter that she was, I think she was like 5'2" or something. She was really short, really diminutive. But when she walked into a room, people who knew her knew they were in trouble if they got in her way. Lots of people will tell you that she would not be one you would want to have a drinking contest with either. Nathaniel Reed, the former Assistant Secretary of the Interior under the Nixon administration, when I was talking to him a few years ago, he died not too long ago, but when I was talking to him, he told some stories about drinking Manhattans with Marjorie and how she would drink any man under the table. So kind of an interesting character. And a lot of people chided her, like, why are you getting involved in the environment and this kind of stuff? And her typical way, she said, it's a woman's business to be interested in the environment. It's an extended form of housekeeping. Back in 1986, I was at the University of Miami, and there was this crazy thing that they did. It was called the National Teleconference on Biodiversity. And I know this is going to sound bizarre to people on a Zoom call, but there was a time when we didn't have Zoom, and people in this auditorium on the University of Miami campus were somehow magically connected to auditoriums around the country and different campuses. And we were all watching the same people at the same time, and we could ask questions of them live. It was totally bizarre and totally what we're all used to now after 9 months of pandemic. But during one of the breaks, I was sitting in the back of that auditorium, and I looked down near the front, and there was a hat sitting on the chair. It was a big floppy hat, but it wasn't really sitting on the hat. It was on someone's head who was so short that it looked like it was sitting on that. And I stared at that for a while, and I thought that could only be one person. And as someone who has aspired to be a national park ranger since I was 7 years old, I thought, when am I ever going to have this opportunity again? And so I walked down to her and I kind of knelt down in front of her and I shook her hand and I said, "Hi, my name's Gary and I want to be a park ranger. And I just want to thank you for everything you did." And I honestly don't think she understood anything I was saying. I thought I was speaking pretty clearly, but she just looked at me and she patted me on the hand and she said, "That's nice, dear," and then went on to talk to somebody else. So that's my my big brush with fame and Marjorie. The other national park that I want to share with you is the place that I already told you is closest to my heart and my home. And Biscayne National Park is the largest marine park in the national park system. Consists of 173,000 acres, 95% of which is covered by water. So basically from the southern tip of Key Biscayne to the northern edge of Key Largo, from the mainland shoreline out to the 60-foot water depth. So we protect mangrove forest, the entire southern expanse of Biscayne Bay, the northernmost Florida Keys, coral reefs, 10,000 years of human history there in the form of shipwrecks and lighthouses and remains of pioneers and all kinds of really amazing stories out there. And just one of my favorite fun facts, there's 600 species of fish alone out there. That's more than all the birds, reptiles, amphibians, mammals, and fish that you would find in much larger parks like Yellowstone or Yosemite. So it's an incredible diversity, largely because of the coral reef out there. Pretty amazing place. But it almost wasn't. And Biscayne National Park is pretty young. It was only established in 1968. And it was done so because there was a couple of threats to the area. One of the development proposals was Sea-Dade. And Sea-Dade was to be a major petrochemical plant on the southern shore of Biscayne Bay, just north of where Biscayne National Park's visitor center is today. And like a lot of projects, people were hoping for jobs. And so there were a lot of supporters of Sea-Dade that wanted to see it happen. But that ultimately was not to be. We'll get that in a minute. The other proposal was to create a city called Islandia. Basically, the plan was to connect Key Biscayne to Key Largo by bridge. There were a couple of other possibilities for that as well. But in order to do that, they were going to create bridges and roads on these islands. And they cleared away the central path of Elliott Key. It was referred to as Elliott Key Boulevard officially. Unofficially, they called it Spite Highway. If you've ever been to Elliott Key, you know that it no longer looks like this. It has grown into a path probably about 6 to 8 feet wide. Narrower now, we don't seem to maintain it much anymore, but it is quite narrow and still there, and we still call it Spite Highway just for fun. A lot of people fought to help make Biscayne National Park happen. And one of them is this woman, Juanita Green. Juanita was a writer for the Miami Herald. She was very excited to come to the Herald to work for a specific person, John Knight. She had a great deal of respect for him. And this was at a time when women really weren't writing for newspapers. But she went and she was able to get this job, and she walked into the newsroom, and guess what? Most of the guys there were real jerks to her. And in her own words, she said, "I was a foreign ingredient in an all-male stew." And I love that line from her. But she ultimately started out writing on so-called women's topics, you know, like cooking and society and stuff like that. And she really wasn't interested in women's topics at all. And so what she really wanted to do was be on the Metro beat. This is when the Dade County government had just been formed as an overarching government over the municipalities. And the creation of municipalities was being frowned upon as an alternative to this much larger government system. And she was really interested in this idea. So she asked to cover the Metro beat, and that's what she was most known for. But she also found that a lot of people were being precluded from access to the shoreline because they weren't wealthy enough to own land along the shoreline. And so she had this idea that she would write a series of articles about specific ways that this was happening. And she steps onto the elevator with John Knight, her mentor, and she has a literal elevator pitch in the Herald building and asks him about writing this. He agrees to it. She starts writing this series of articles about people losing access to shorelines. And as she interviews people for these things, she's finding a whole bunch of people that are involved in different ways. And these people are reading about other people that are doing similar things to what they're doing in the newspaper each day. And so in an age before social media connected everybody with similar interests at the touch of a button by joining a Facebook group or something, Juanita Green really connected the people that were fighting for this, and they came to know one another. They came to work together from their various backgrounds, and they created what was called the Safe Progress Association, which fought and lobbied to have a national park established. I didn't want to have any men in this presentation except for the jerk, but I can't go without acknowledging this man who was in this really goofy photo illustration that the Herald did for the park's 40th birthday, who was at the table with Juanita when the park was established. And that is Lloyd Miller. And Lloyd Miller was a dear friend of mine who celebrated his 100th birthday in July. And we had a big birthday drive-by parade during COVID for him. And that day was the last day I ever saw him because he died on August 23rd. He is a legend to many. And so I want to just acknowledge him and his passing. This has become one of my new favorite people. I knew a little bit about Polly Redford from something that I'll share with you in a moment, but I didn't know a whole lot about her until very recently and started to read some of her books. She was a native of Chicago and moved to South Florida in 1958. She and her husband, Jim Redford, and their two boys, Adam and Matthew, were here in South Florida. They quickly became involved in the outdoors, bird watching, fishing, diving. She had horrible eyesight, and so diving was not an easy thing for her. Prescription masks were very expensive, but she got one of those and was able to explore the underwater world with it. She took friends on expeditions and whatnot, but she was really a very prolific and funny writer for magazines that are really widely divergent. Harper's and The Atlantic. She also wrote about food for Gourmet. She had books of her own. She has a wonderful Christmas book that's hard to find, but I just recently read it just last week for the first time, called The Christmas Bower, about a department store in Chicago and birding and birds. If you're a bird lover, you might find this book pretty humorous for the holidays. She also wrote Billion Dollar Sandbar, which is a kind of subtitled a biography of Miami Beach. It raised a lot of eyebrows, ticked a lot of people off because she called it like she saw it in a very funny way. So it was a popular book about Miami Beach and the people there and the development there. And I'm looking forward to reading that one soon as well. For Biscayne National Park, perhaps her biggest contribution was an article that appeared in Harper's Magazine in 1964 called Small Rebellion in Miami. And she put on to a national stage the fight that was happening in South Florida, with people like Lloyd Miller and Juanita Green and someone else I'll introduce you to in a moment or two, and her husband as well. It was a pretty interesting mix of people that were brought together. Sadly, she died at a very young age, not 1946. She died at age 46. So we didn't have her around for long, but in her obituary, one of the women that that wrote her obituary talked about how enthusiastic she was about so many things and how she encouraged her to go diving. And so they went diving together. And this woman was pretty nervous about going underwater. And pretty much as soon as she got underwater, she saw barracuda staring her down. And she was terrified, and she went shooting to the surface. And Polly went chasing after her and like, what's wrong? And she said, well, this barracuda was looking at me. And Polly was furious that she went shooting to the surface. And she said, when a barracuda blinks at you, blink back. She was audacious and she was in your face. And I love that quote from her because it's kind of inspiring to me when people who don't know what they're talking about try to mush you down a little bit maybe, and just stand right up to them. And I love that inspiration from her. Belle Scheffel came to Miami from Boston in 1926 with her husband. I don't know a whole lot about her. There's not a whole lot of info out there. I found a little bit. She came, and I just imagine her being a real free spirit with her husband. They knew nothing about boats, but they bought a boat and they decided they're going to live on a boat. And you might recognize the year 1926 as a significant one in Miami. Hurricane comes through. So they're living on a boat. They hear about this hurricane. So they go up into the Miami River a ways, not too far up from what I understand. And they ride out the hurricane in a boat. And it was rough and it was rocking and it was tough. But then the storm stopped. So they went up on the deck and they're surveying the damage, and they put on a pot of coffee and they're sitting on the deck eating. And you know what? All of a sudden the wind came back and they thought, oh, we better go back down. And again, it was rough and rocking, and they could hear this grinding and they were wobbling around and everything. And then the wind stopped again. And they peeked outside, and they realized they were on dry land several hundred yards in. From what I gather, it was about where the Whole Foods store is in downtown Miami right now. And they had been in the eye of the storm, had no idea what they were doing when they made coffee sitting out there. So they had quite an adventuresome life. Rode out the 26 hurricane in a sailboat. She became very active in garden clubs, and garden club, as Polly Redford wrote in her Harper's Magazine piece, garden club ladies are also women's club ladies. So there was this connection of garden clubs and women's clubs and places where women would hang out and wanted to make a difference, and were in places where they felt they could make a difference. Now, in these garden clubs, she would try and influence people. She used her own personal funds to buy postcards and stamps. And she would bring stacks of postcards, and they would have postcard writing parties supporting the idea for Biscayne National Park. And apparently Belle is probably got a lot in common with me, where they want to control the situation. And she was like looking over their shoulders, making sure they were writing everything correctly and not anything inappropriate. And so she contributed in a relatively small way, but kind of a cool story anyway. Rachel Carson is probably best known for her seminal work, Silent Spring. That was her very last book, but that book launched the environmental movement with so many laws that came out of it as a result. But that came at the end of her life. Her first love was the ocean, and she wrote books like The Sea Around Us and others. She loved the ocean, but more specifically, she loved the place where the ocean met the land. That's what she was passionate about, that literal zone there, the edge, the ecotone. And so that's where she spent a lot of time writing passionately. She did some work in the Keys. Again, it was stuff along the shoreline and whatnot. She was not one who was excited about being on boats. She was not one who spent a lot of time underwater, but she came to South Florida with a friend, and they had hoped to finally get the experience of going underwater on a coral reef. and they got here and it was pretty rough and rocky. They weren't able to do much. They had all kinds of fun on Miami Beach, but they weren't able to go underwater. And finally, things calmed down enough where they were able to go for a dive. And diving in Rachel Carson's day was not what it was for us. If you look there in front of her, that is a dive helmet. And I think that weighs like 85 pounds or so. And she donned that and went down a ladder to the bottom and terrified by all accounts. She was not excited at all. She never let go of the ladder. She was down there looking at fish. She spent an entire time of about 15 minutes underwater before coming back up. And it was only at a depth of about 8 feet. And despite that, that was, as far as I know, that was the only time that she was ever underwater for any extended period of time. And the person that we think of as one of the greatest ocean scientists ever didn't really like being underwater. But here's what she said. I'll read you a quote. Here's what she said about that 15-minute experience. The difference between having dived, even under non-ideal conditions, and never having dived is so tremendous that it formed one of those milestones of life, after which everything seems a little different. So the interesting thing about that is Rachel Carson's very first dive happened in what we think happened within what is Biscayne National Park. I believe that is Virginia Key off in the background. She set off from that area. So she was somewhere very close to, if not in, Biscayne National Park. Women in the National Park Service have had to suffer the indignities of crazy clothes and kind of being derided by their male peers over a long period of time. And you see some of the crazy uniforms that that they wore. But today's national park women are pretty amazing people. And if the jerk were here, he might say that they are some pretty tough broads. And these are some of the people that I am fortunate enough to work with every day, doing research with wildlife, flying over the park to deal with issues. In the parks, there are women who are out there taking care of exotic species. They are working with education of children. There are artists who use these places as inspiration so they can share these stories with other people out there. They're out there putting in mooring buoys. They're removing exotic plants. And they are the face of the National Park Service to so many. And these are my friends and inspirations to me. And I am extraordinarily honored to work with them. And why do they do that? They do it for the benefit of the future women and men who are going to have these places to enjoy forever and ever. As I wrap things up here, I have another quote from Polly Redford that I find inspiring, and I hope you do as well. She said that conservation work is only for the very strong and the very dedicated. It requires, above all, an ability to pick yourself up off the floor and begin again and again and again. And I find that pretty special. We can't be discouraged no matter what things are like, because we have evidence in 2 extraordinary national parks and so many others across the country that everybody plays a role in protecting them. So thank you for your time this afternoon. Ed and Anna have this little poll that will help them out. I'm guessing I need to turn this over to them because I don't know exactly how it works. Oh, look, there's a poll in progress that appeared on the screen. So go ahead and answer those 3 simple questions for demographics purposes. And I am happy to take questions from whoever has them.
Thank you so much, Gary. That was a great presentation. Again, thank you guys for filling out this super easy poll. Just to clarify for number 2, for how many people are watching, this is you and whoever else, if you have anyone with you watching, just to let us know that so we can properly count today's audience. And Gary, when you have a sec, we can turn your camera on so you can address everyone. And for those that have finished the poll, if you have any questions for Gary, you can go ahead and type them in the chat box.
And please scroll down to the bottom of the poll so you see all the questions, everyone, and then hit submit.
So are there any questions out there? Or are we going to hold for a second on the poll?
Looks like we can go ahead and end this poll. Thank you guys for participating. And again, any questions now, you can go ahead and put that in the chat. All right, so for our first question, comes from Deborah. Deborah would like to know, Gary, are you still offering events during COVID at Biscayne National Park?
Events, kind of, sort of, yeah. Virtual events. So I meant to put a slide in here promoting this and I failed to do that. But on January 10th, we are having a virtual art opening at 1 p.m. in the afternoon. That'll be on our Facebook Live page. We have a beautiful, beautiful new exhibit in works of the palette knife artists of Miami called Wings of Hope. And these are paintings of some of the imperiled birds of the area paired with photographs by Bonnie Mazdu. So if you want to participate in that, you just go to Biscayne National Park's Facebook page, Biscayne NPS, at 1 o'clock on January 10th. That's a Sunday afternoon. We will be showing some of the artwork, sharing some of the processes that the artists use. And we'll also have a talk by Brian Raposa from Tropical Audubon Society about birds as well. If you want to go out and see some birds the day before, the Biscayne National Park Institute is offering a special boat trip out to, weather permitting, out to the Foy Rocks Lighthouse, which is a good place to see some of the pelagic birds that are flying around out there or might be there, things like boobies and magnificent frigate birds and whatnot. So check that out. The Biscayne National Park Institute is offering a whole variety of trips that are socially distanced and reduced capacity boats. So you can still go paddling in Jones Lagoon, which is where I am right now, as you can see in the background, my all-time favorite place in the park. Jones Lagoon, go snorkeling when it's not 48 degrees in Miami. How ridiculous is that? So yeah, there's all kinds of stuff going on. Just visit our website, which is nps.gov/BISC.
Great, thanks, Gary. And Gary, real quickly, do you want to move back to the other slide that had your contact info, just in case anyone has any questions that come up after?
Sure.
And then just to remind everyone, I know it's a little past 12:30. We are going to stay on even after our questions to do our trivia session. So if you want to participate in that, please do continue to stay on. I have a question coming in now from Fanny. Fanny wants to know, or Fanny's just letting us know that Miami-Dade Parks is offering virtual Great Parks Summit April 22nd. And they are looking for art and nature speaker recommendations with a focus on conservation. Is there anyone, Gary, that you might recommend to present at this committee?
Art and nature, yeah. I coordinate the gallery at Biscayne National Park, and so I probably have lots of suggestions, maybe even including one of my new coworkers who is a photographer and is working on things in far off places like Namibia and whatnot, as well as hopefully South Florida. So Fanny, if you want to drop me an email, Gary_Bremen@nps.gov, I'd be happy to provide you with a list of folks that I think might be appropriate.
Great. And Jay suggests, and I agree with him, he suggests you as a presenter there.
I don't know about arts. I like art. I like looking at art. I don't produce art much. So
so Maria has a question. She says, what are some conservation efforts that locals can participate in at Biscayne National Park, or I guess even at some Everglades National Park as well?
Yeah, and everything I might say here is, of course, couched in the concept that we all need to make sure we're keeping ourselves and one another safe and not getting out there too much during this time. But certainly there are volunteer opportunities. Coworker and one of my closest friends, Liz, is our volunteer coordinator at Biscayne National Park. There will be some small distanced cleanup operations. As I'm sure many of you are aware, marine debris is an enormous problem on the shores of South Florida. And that becomes especially a problem when sea turtles try to nest. It's ugly, it's a real mess, animals get entangled in it. And so cleanups are a never-ending and really important way to do it. I showed a picture earlier of two women holding a python. That's Ann Gordon Vega and Dylan Tufts. They are volunteers. They go out at night hunting pythons. Now, it's something you have to be trained to do, and it can be pretty scary. Ann's got some pretty hairy stories about things that have happened out there. But there are lots of opportunities, and certainly, you know, the kind of work that I and my immediate coworkers do in terms of education, helping people understand why these places are special and important, and giving them the reasons for wanting to protect these places. Those are really important too. And when we get out of this horrible situation that the world is in right now, we hope that we'll be able to welcome volunteers back, and you can do that kind of work too. So lots of opportunities.
Great. And I would just add for you, Maria, a great website to check out because, you know, opportunities to help out in local conservation efforts throughout the Bay, throughout Miami-Dade County, you know, has positive impacts to Biscayne National Park. So I'm going to type it into the chat, but volunteer cleanup, they list a number of cleanups happening in the area, including ones that happen at Biscayne National Park through other organizations. So that would be a great place to check for opportunities, especially right now during COVID. That gets updated pretty regularly.
And I just want to add one more quickie there, Ed, that, you know, picking up trash doesn't sound glamorous, and it's not glamorous, but there are things about it that make it fascinating. To find something that has floated from, you know, the other side of the ocean or from the Caribbean, or find a seed that washed in from South America or something, like, these are the things that make it a really fascinating thing. And there are a lot of people who go out there to do it because of the amazing stuff that you can learn by doing a cleanup. So it's not just garbage, you know?
That's a good point. Yeah, there's always treasures to be found out there.
Yes, indeed.
So we have a couple more questions coming in. I have another one from Fanny. She says, what is the main conservation message of the Park Service?
I guess it would be what's written in our enabling legislation, that we're protecting these places for future generations, so that, you know, Sylvia Earle, so that people can see fish in a place other than swimming in butter and lemon on their plate. You know, that's for us in Biscayne National Park, but that's the case everywhere, is protecting these places. And mission of the National Park Service is different from the mission of, say, the Forest Service or the Fish and Wildlife Service, which we certainly have some similarities to. But, you know, the Forest Service, their real mission is to protect trees so we can cut them down and make paper and furniture and things like that. And they certainly have more of a recreational mandate now than they did when they were established, but that's the reason they were established. And Fish and Wildlife are managing forest-specific species, Whereas national parks, the idea is to protect an ecosystem, and by so doing, you protect everybody that lives in that ecosystem. So I guess that would be it, is that never forgetting that we're doing this for future generations.
Great. We'll do one more question. I have a good one here from Anna. If any of the ladies you spoke with were still alive, who do you think would be running amok in our national parks?
Oh my God, I hope all of them. And some of the women are still alive. You know, those ones that I showed at the end, those are my friends and people that I love dearly, and they are literally and figuratively running amok out there. But you know, I did know Juanita Green, and I had many conversations with her, but as I said, the person that I really would have liked to hung out with, because I think she would have been a riot, was Polly Redford. Just reading her books, she had this sense of humor that I totally understand, and I could just see her wincing and tongue in cheek all the time. I think we would get along. So that would be her. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Gary. I think at this point, we are going to wrap it up, and we invite everyone to stay on. If you have some time, we're going to do our end of the year trivia for the opportunity to win some fun prizes. So Gary, I'm going to ask you to please stop sharing your screen, and Ed is going to share his. And I encourage everyone to participate, even if you have never seen one of our other webinars, even if this is just your first time, and just do your best guess as to what you think the trivia answers are. And Ed's gonna go over the rules for the game, and it'll only take the next few minutes.
Give me 1 second to get this up.
No problem.
All right, and just to confirm, that's up on the screen.
Yep, I see it.
Great. So real quickly, so we're going to go through this trivia. This is a trivia that goes over a lot of the presentations that we had from the start of our conservation conversation series. Again, they go through the topics that we have covered in previous sessions. We're going to go ahead and have you respond. We're going to have each question up on the screen for a brief amount of time. And we're going to have you respond in the chat with the answer. We're going to record those responses. The first one to respond with a correct answer, we're going to mark down and add that to your score. And then by the end, we're going to do the top 3 scorers. And there are, I believe, 20 questions for this presentation. And at the conclusion of that, we will go ahead and tally those up. Anna, did I leave anything out there?
No, you got it, Ed. Thanks.
All right. So again, you can find that chat box really quickly. The chat box, if you haven't found it already, is located on the toolbar on the bottom of your screen. And again, it'll be automatically set to send it to everyone. So again, that's why the first one to respond will get that point.
But we
right,
won't
so we'll
reveal the answers until we've gone through all the questions.
Yes.
Delayed gratification.
All right, so we will get started. Here we go. The first question. The 3 pillars of Miami-Dade County Parks, Rec, and Open Spaces are?
Although I have to say that those who might have intimate knowledge, who might be employed in certain departments, might not get their points counted if they have home field advantage for certain questions. Just saying.
All right, we're going to move on to the next question. What year was the first crocodile discovered at Turkey Point?
Ooh, that's a good one. Let's keep going, Ed.
All right, next one. Aside from the Caribbean spiny lobster, what two other groups of families of lobster are found in Southeast Florida?
So you have to have both. Delicious guy. Yummy lobster.
Couple more seconds here. All right, question 4. The two most common nutrients that lead to eutrophication in our local water bodies are? Same with this one, we need both.
And if you're worried,
Some
spelling
creative
does
answers.
not count. Spelling does not count, folks.
Okay. Moving on to question 5. Of these 4, what percentage of Miami-Dade County's waste is recycled?
Letting in. J. Johnstone, I'd say none. Well,
Okay. Question 6. What is one way to mitigate for barotrauma when fishing?
there are 2 acceptable answers. We're looking for one. Kasia, don't fish is not really what we're looking for. And for those who might not be familiar with the term barotrauma, that's simply referring to a pressure injury that the fish experiences when it's brought up from depth.
Alrighty. Moving on to question 7. Name 2 reasons for the decline of Goliath grouper.
Man, you guys are so fast, I can barely write down everyone's names.
All right. Question 8. What are the 2 of the 3 types of sounds that dolphins make? There are 3 types of sounds. Which one of these options has 2 of the 3?
$52. You guys are making this extra fun.
All right. Question 9. Approximately how many species of sharks are found in the world? How many total species of sharks?
Kasia, sure, throw out multiple answers. It's just we're looking for whoever has put the first correct answer, which we're not saying just yet. But we've got myself and Heather and Ed who are tracking.
All right, we'll move to question 10. Alligators, crocodiles, and other reptiles are cold-blooded, or name that scientific term that refers to cold-blooded. Okay. Question 11. What is the most common species of sea turtle that can be found nesting in Miami-Dade? So specifically, one of these species is the most common to come up on our beaches here in South Florida, or in Miami-Dade County, to nest. Okay. Question 12. What are the two most common methods for recreational divers and snorkelers to remove lionfish from our waters? Methods of removal of lionfish. So again, we need two. Your response should be two.
The safest and
That's
easiest. Well done,
true,
Fan.
Fanny, yes. All right. Question 13 asks, what is the main source of marine debris in the ocean? The main way that marine debris enters our ocean. All right, next up, question 14. Florida's coral reef, formerly the Florida Reef Tract, is the blank largest barrier reef tract in the world. Looking for the number.
Yeah, Jay, the name did officially change. Been called the Florida Reef Tract for a really long time, but in the last, I don't remember, 6 or 8 months, it was officially renamed, redesignated as Florida's Coral Reef. So the reef formerly known as the Florida Reef Tract.
All right, question 15. Feral cats are a blank species in Florida.
Gary, FDEP, I think, and the sanctuary.
We're looking for the term here for question 15 of the type of species that feral cats would be considered.
All right, we're in the home stretch, guys.
All right, question 16. The blank is a large invasive reptile that was most likely released through exotic pet trade and has since exploded in population throughout the Everglades. The species threatens native wildlife, and while eradication measures are continually being pursued, detection rates and lack of natural predators can give them an advantage over other native species in the Everglades. Which species of invasive reptile?
Yeah, Fanny, it's almost not even a race of do you know the answer, but how quickly you can type. So if anyone's joining from a phone, I'm sorry, because that's really hard to respond if you don't have a real keyboard.
All right. Next question, 17. True or false, sex of spotted eagle rays can be determined by their spot pattern? Need a T or F?
Ooh. Ooh.
Okay.
Lifeline. I have to say, I want to acknowledge everyone who's been on here with us throughout the start of this series, and everyone who's joining us for the first time. Welcome. We hope you're enjoying yourselves. We had a lot of fun putting this together.
We did. A couple more questions. Question 18. A greenhouse is a greenhouse gas and is the main driver of climate change. Question 19. How many species of seagrasses are found in Florida?
Oh, some of you guys are making a comeback.
Yeah.
Closing the gap.
Push here. Interesting strategy.
Yeah, that's a good approach, Chuck.
Yeah. All right. Question 20. One of the most important components of Florida's coastal dune ecosystem, specifically for its role in shoreline stabilization, is the blank, a long-lived perennial grass which gets its name from the seed head or panicle found at the end of its leaves. Looking for a type of coastal plant. All right. So that wraps up the questions. I'll give everyone a second. How'd you all do? We'll quickly converse and check our tallies here.
Ed, do you mind advancing the slides and I'll start reading out the answers? That way we don't keep
Sure.
people much longer.
Sure. All right. So question 1, the 3 pillars of Miami-Dade County Parks, Rec, and Open Spaces are?
Oh, if you hit the space bar, yeah.
Yeah, I got it. All right, so the first one, if you put conservation, stewardship, placemaking, health, and fitness, you are correct. Question 2, what year was the first crocodile discovered at Turkey Point? Answer was 1976.
Yeah, I think Jorge was closest with his guess on
Yeah.
that one.
All right. Question 3. Aside from the Caribbean spiny lobster, what 2 other groups or families of lobster are found in Southeast Florida? We have our Spanish or slipper lobster and the spotted lobster. I think we got that. All right, question 4. The 2 most common nutrients that lead to eutrophication in our local water bodies are nitrogen and phosphorus. Question 5, what percentage of Miami-Dade County's waste is recycled? That would be 18%, theoretically. Question 6, what is one way to mitigate for barotrauma when fishing? That is to venting or use a descending device. Question 7, Goliath groupers can grow up to blank feet in length. So this was a question that we switched. The answer to the question, Goliath groupers, Anna, do you have that? Hold on one second. I think it was, yeah, so we were just checking that. So the 2 ways to help conserve Goliath groupers, or the threats to them, was overharvesting and loss of habitat. Question 8, what are the 3 types of sounds that dolphins make? Name 2 of them. The answer are echolocation clicks and burst pulse sounds. Question 9, approximately how many species of sharks are found in the world? 500. I do believe somebody hit that on the nose. Question 10, alligators, crocodiles, and other reptiles are cold-blooded, or the scientific name for that, term for that, is ectothermic. Question 11, what is the most common species of sea turtle that can be found nesting in Miami-Dade County? The answer is D, loggerhead. Question 12, what are the 2 most common methods for recreational divers and snorkelers to remove lionfish from our waters? That would be hand nets and pole spears. Question 13, what is the main source of marine debris in the ocean, or the main leading cause for how it enters? That would be land-based activities such as littering. Question 14, Florida's coral reef, formerly the Florida Reef Tract, is the blank largest barrier reef tract in the world. That's 3rd. Question 15, feral cats are an invasive species in Florida. 16, again, this was the reptile that has become a major nuisance and one of the larger or more problematic invasive species. That's the Burmese python. Question 17, this one was a little tough for some. Sex of spotted eagle rays can be determined by their spot pattern. The answer is false. 18, blank is a greenhouse gas and is the main driver of climate change. Most everyone got this, carbon dioxide. How many species of seagrass are found in Florida? That would be 7. And then lastly, one of the most important components of Florida's coastal dune ecosystem, that long-lived perennial grass, that would be the sea oat. So thank you guys all for participating in that. We do have we'll get our tallies for our top scorers here. So with a total of 7, in first place, we had Chuck Brown, congrats. Followed up by Megan. Megan had 5. And then in third place, we have Jay with 3. So thank you guys for participating in that. Nice job. Quick fingers there for those 3. And we will contact you individually via the email that you guys provided us for this webinar to follow up with you. But I want to thank everyone for joining us for not just today's presentation, but all of our conservation conversation webinars throughout this year. We really look forward to seeing you guys in the spring. We have a lineup of some great presentations, which we will reach out to you guys with those via, again, if you want to get an email notification with those upcoming webinars, just shoot an email to Anna. I'm going to put her email in the chat, or you can follow us on social media. Our handles are there on the page. There's Anna's email as well. And we really look forward to seeing you guys in the spring. Thank you all again, and let's thanks Gary again for his presentation today. Really great job. Thanks everyone.
Yeah, it was wonderful having you all. And just as a tantalizing tidbit, our first conversation of the new year will be Wednesday, January 13th. And I will be presenting about lighthouses of Southeast Florida. So we'll be posting that on our social media channels and sending out the emails to our regular folks. And we really hope you'll join us again. Thanks so much. And this will be recorded, and the email with the recording will be sent out in the next week, okay?
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Gary.